Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Ashrafil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We concluded last week's lesson by mentioning the changing of the Qibla from Masjid al-Aqsa to the Baytullah. And I mentioned that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated to Medina Munawwara, so for approximately 16 to 18 months, the Qibla was towards Masjid al-Aqsa. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse, فَوَلِّي وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. And the command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to change the orientation for the salah from Masjid al-Aqsa to Baytullah. And it's mentioned in the books of hadith like Sahih al-Bukhari that what happened was that the companions, they were reading salah, and then the order came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in namaz to change the Qibla. So just say for argument's sake, if Masjid al-Aqsa was to that direction and Baytullah was to that direction, so the Sahabas, they were praying salah facing that direction, and then in namaz the order came to change the Qibla. So what then happened was that the Sahabas who were on the first row, they then turned around full circle and they were now on the back row, and the Sahabas who were on the last saf, they now turned around and they were on the first saf. And the Imam, what happened was that he then turned all the way round and he came to the back and he led the salah. Obviously you may be asking, how did the Imam just move around and just walk from the front to the back? Obviously initially at the very beginning of Islam, he was allowed to do excessive actions in salah. You're allowed to talk in salah. You were allowed to give salams to people in salah. You were allowed to move around in salah. Obviously slowly these things became abrogated, and then the order came from Allah, وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ, which means that when you are in salah, make sure you stand with tranquility, peace. But initially at the very beginning of Islam, talking in salah was allowed. Somebody gave you salam to reply to them, say wa alaykum salam. All these things were permissible. So obviously this was at the very beginning of Islam. Excessive actions moving from one place to another, that was allowed and that was permissible. So this is what we touched on in last week's lesson. Now in this week's lesson, continuing from what I just mentioned, in Masjid al-Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Qibla was changed, in the direction of the old Qibla, there was some space there. And there was a kind of large area, large space. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he thought long and hard what he should do with this particular space. Basically, the Qibla had now changed full circle. So the Qibla was now that direction towards Baytullah. And the Masjid al-Aqsa Qibla, which was there was a large space there. The mihrab area, there was quite a bit of space. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was thinking to himself that what should we do with this particular area and with this particular space? Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam decided that we should use this place to house the Ashab Suffah. That this will be the place where the Ashab Suffah will stay, would read, would eat, would do everything, and this will be their home. Now who are the Ashab Suffah? Who are they? Now Ashab Suffah are a group of Sahabas, or to be more precise, a group of Mutawakkilins, those who had full trust, borosa and tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And their objective in life was, number one, to attain spiritual purification. And this was obviously achieved and attained by being in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by being in the masjid mahol and environment, by reading Quran, by reading tasbih, by, say for example, tahajjud, nafil salah, and so on and so forth. And their second goal and intention was to acquire the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. These were the two things which the Ashab Suffah dedicated their lives to Number one, the spiritual purification, and number two, acquiring knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. And when you look at it, tazkiyah and tasawwuf, that is also in a nutshell, that's what tasawwuf and tazkiyah is. Spiritual purification, rectification, followed by knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah. As Imam Malik rahimullah quite beautifully points out, that somebody who acquires knowledge but no tasawwuf and tazkiyah, then he is a fasiq, a fajir. And then on the other hand, somebody who acquires tazkiyah and tasawwuf but not knowledge, then he is a zindiq and a heretic. It's mentioned Imam Malik rahimullah saying. So when you look at it, the principles of tasawwuf and suluk can actually be traced all the way back to the Ashab Sufa, who during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, in the markaz, in the center, i.e. Masjid al-Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they dedicated their lives for spiritual purification, and also number two, to acquire knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now there are many attributes of the Ashab Sufa, and their main attribute, the main attribute of the Ashab Sufa, was that they were far away from the dunya. They had no love, no kind of aspiration for dunya or anything which was connected with dunya. Because as you know, hubbud dunya, love for the world, is actually a razai. And similarly, there are other things which are connected with love for the dunya, but is also a razail as well. Say for example, fame, riya. Sometimes we like that adulation, we like that fame, but when you look at the ins and outs of it, the reason why we want that fame is because of dunya. So there are many things like that, hubbud dunya, but other razails which are connected with hubbud dunya. Like for example, stinginess, which I was explaining the other day, that comes about because of love for this world. That's a razail. Similarly, like for example, fame, as I was explaining, riya, show-offing, doing it for someone other than Allah, they all come under dunya and love for this world, and thinking that this dunya is everything for me, this dunya is Jannah and paradise, then that's where everything comes about. But the Ashab Sufa, they were far away from the dunya. Some people, they say they want tazkiyah and tasawwuf, but then they love the dunya. That doesn't work. Similarly, there are some people who say, no, I want to learn Quran and Hadith, but they want to chase the dunya. It doesn't work like that. The Ashab Sufa, they shunned the dunya, they gave away the dunya. Why? For spiritual purification, and also number two, to acquire knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'll just give you a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated by Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu, of how poor the Ashab Sufa were. Now Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu mentions that the Ashab Sufa, they only had one chadar, one piece of garment. That's it. Only one piece of garment they had. And this piece of garment, it wasn't so long and big that it covered their entire body. It's mentioned in this hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari that it was just enough to cover the lower part of the body. So the top part, like their chest and their area above the neck, that would be exposed. And he goes on to say that some of the Ashab Sufa were so poor that they had one piece of garment, but it was just enough to cover the area from their belly button up to their knees. i.e. the satar, which needs to be covered for salah, they only had that much garment, that much piece of clothing to cover that area. So that's how poor they were. In another hadith, Wathila bin Asqa radhiyallahu anhu was Sahabi. He was also from the Ashab Sufa. So he narrates that because of, as you know, Arabia, a very hot country, the Ashab Sufa, we would sweat. You say, like, we would be in the masjid, we would be outside, we would sweat. There would be like sweat on our body, which over time caused grime, or we say in Urdu, mel kuchel, on our body. Like when you sweat and you don't go for a shower, then there's like stickiness, and then when you rub your arms or your body, then that black mel kuchel comes out. So Hazrat Wathila bin Asqa who said that all the Ashab Sufa, our body was like that. There was always mel kuchel and dirt on our body. But then Wathila bin Asqar radiallahu anhu says that, however, this dirt which was on our body, we liked it and loved it more than cleanliness. I may be thinking, how can that be? Because doesn't the hadith talk about in Islam about cleanliness, at-tuhuru shatrul iman, purification part of iman? It's mentioned in another hadith, to counteract that, it's mentioned in another hadith, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once asked that which Hajj is the most preferable. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied by saying, ash-sha'isu at-tafil, i.e. that Hajj which means that your hair is disheveled, or which causes your hair to get more disheveled, and which causes your ihram clothes to get dirty, that is the most beloved Hajj. In other words, what Rasulullah is trying to say is that Qiran Hajj, as you know, the three types of Hajj. One is Qiran, where you do Umrah and Hajj together. And those who have been for Hajj will know that in that particular Hajj, Qiran Hajj, you're in Ihram longer, like 6 days, 7 days even. You're in Ihram. And obviously the longer, because as in those who have gone for Hajj will know that when you are in Ihram, you can't apply any scent, perfume, you can't go for a shower, you can't apply soap or shower gel and these kind of things. So what then happens, and plus Arabia, hot country, more sweat, more grime, more dirt on your body. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that that is the most beloved Hajj. Why? Because what Wathila bin Asqar was trying to say is that getting dirty, getting your hands dirty, but for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for fi sabilillah, that is more rewardable. So similarly, Wathila bin Asqar and all the Ashab Sufa, they would sweat, there would be dirt on their body, but because they were doing it for a noble cause. And what was the noble cause, as I explained? Spiritual rectification and knowledge of the Quran and the Hadith. That's why they were willing to go through that particular state. And there's so many other examples, like in the Hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari when it comes to fasting, that what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he said that the odor from your mouth, la khalufu fami sa'im, that is the most dearest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now again, the odor from the mouth, that's not some, when you wake up in the morning, you can't take the smell of your own mouth. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that, Allah is saying that this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that that odor is the most beloved to Allah. Why? Because you're going through that state for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why Hazrat Wathila bin Asqar anhu is saying that even the dirt we went through, the difficulty we went through, because it was done for a good cause, a noble cause, i.e. for the spiritual purification and for acquiring knowledge of Quran and Sunnah, that's why we loved being in that particular state. So that's one thing which we can gather from the Ashab Sufa, i.e. living a life of poverty, i.e. totally away from the dunya and the lights and the gleam of this world. Now a second attribute of the Ashab Sufa is that the Ashab Sufa, they would remain hungry for long periods of the time. So like, and when I mean long periods of time, I don't mean a few hours, by the way, just like if we had anything for 3 hours, then so long period of time. No, long period of time, days, even sometimes weeks would pass by without eating anything, without eating actually a full meal. Obviously they would munch on some dates here and there, whatever they could find, some beads here and there, whatever they find, they would eat it. But sometimes days and weeks would pass without having a full meal. And there's a very famous hadith regarding their state and in particular their hunger, which can again be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, again narrated by Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu. Remember Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu, he was also from the Ashab Sufa. Now he once narrates that he was very, very hungry. This Abu Hurairah anhu talking about, he was so hungry. He hadn't eaten for days. He mentioned that he lost count how many days had passed without him eating. Now, Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu, he was very knowledgeable in terms of, he knew the tafsir and interpretation of Quran and the Sunnah. Now, on the way, he met Hazrat Abu Bakr anhu. And his intention was that I'll ask Abu Bakr anhu a question about a Quranic verse, or Abu Bakr, what's the tafsir of this verse, or what's the interpretation of this hadith. And my intention was so that Abu Bakr anhu could see my state, could see how hungry I am, could see I'm just about to collapse because of sheer hunger. and then he will feel sorry for me, he will have pity on me, and then what he will do, he will then take me home and give me a meal. So as Abu Hurairah anhu, he then finds Abu Bakr, he stops Abu Bakr anhu, tells him, oh Abu Bakr, what's the tafsir of this ayat? Obviously he knew it, but he was asking him with the intention that Abu Bakr will then see the state and then will take him and invite him for a meal. Now Abu Bakr anhu answered his question, but obviously Hazrat Abu Bakr didn't get the hint. So then Hazrat Abu Bakr anhu left him and just went. Obviously didn't intentionally, but he didn't get the hint of what Abu Hurairah anhu was trying to do. Then afterwards, Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu met Hazrat Umar anhu. Again, same thing. He asked Hazrat Umar anhu a question, but again the intention was so Umar anhu could see how hungry he was and have pity on him and then invite him for a meal. Again, Umar anhu answered his question, but he didn't get the hint. Afterwards, Abu Hurairah anhu met Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Obviously, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam understood what Abu Hurairah anhu was trying to do. So Abu sallallahu alaihi wasallam invited Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu to his house. Now, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took him to his house, there was just a container of milk. There was just a container, and it was just full of milk, a small container. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Abu Hurairah anhu, go and call all the Ashab Suffah. Go and call all the Ashab Suffah. Now there were approximately 70 of them at that time. Go and call all of them. Now it's mentioned in the hadith that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Abu Hurairah anhu to go and call the Ashab Suffah, Abu Hurairah anhu felt a bit uneasy, because obviously there's only one bowl of milk, and if we were to call all the Ashab Suffah, they'll drink it, then what's going to be left for us? What's going to be left for me? So Abu Hurairah anhu felt a bit uneasy. He's thinking, oh, do I really need to call them and so on? Sometimes when there's like food, you don't want to invite others, you want to eat yourself. So Abu Hurairah anhu, obviously, because of the hunger, obviously you shouldn't really, whenever there's food, you try to share with people. But obviously because of the hunger, Abu Hurairah anhu had that thought. So he said, okay, because there was a command from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he went to the masjid, he called all the Ashab Suffah to come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's house. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the honorable thing would be to actually give the milk first to Abu Hurairah anhu, because he was the first one who asked. But instead, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Abu Hurairah anhu to actually give the milk to the Ashab Suffah first. Give it to them first. So again, Abu Hurairah anhu felt a bit uneasy, because by the time all 70 of them even take a sip of it, there'll be nothing left for me. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it's an order, command, Abu Hurairah anhu had to abide by it. So he told the Ashab Suffah, okay, start drinking. So the hadith goes on to say that they drank to their fill. The next person, he drank to the fill, all the way after all of them drank. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said to Abu Hurairah anhu, the bowl came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said to Abu Hurairah anhu, there's only me and you left. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave the bowl to Abu Hurairah anhu, and he told him to drink. So he drank. Then like sometimes when you drink something and then you take a breather, like it's a bit enough, Rasulullah sallallahu kept on saying to Abu Hurairah, no, drink more. So Hazrat Abu Hurairah anhu kept on drinking until he was totally full. And then afterwards, Abu Hurairah said, oh Prophet, I can't take anymore, this is enough. And then afterwards, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the bowl, and then he started drinking to his full. So again, this actually hadith in Bukhari, it's actually one of the miracles of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that one bowl of milk and more than 70 people were able to drink to their full with this with the milk Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, to show the barakah and blessings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's so many examples like that. Whenever just a hadith which we were looking at earlier of there was a well in Hudaybiyah. So again, it's mentioned the hadith, again it's of Sahih al-Bukhari, that the Sahabas, they came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said to Prophet of Allah, like, it's really hot, we're really thirsty, and there is not a single drop of water in this well. So it's mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then placed his lu'ab mubarak, his saliva, in the well, and then all of a sudden the well started brewing water, and then the whole well was full of water, and the Sahabas, they drank to their fill. Similarly, the camels, the animals they had, they also drank to their fill as well. Even like a camel, it's like a machine when it comes to drinking water, he even drank to the fill as well. And why? Because of one Du'a Mubarak of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these are all mu'jizas, miracles of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is always nice to hear in terms of it should give us yaqeen and certainty of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being our Rasul and being our Prophet and Messenger of Allah. Now, just to conclude, so what we just touched on was regarding Ashab Suffah. And when we analyze it, there were two attributes of this which can be seen from the hadiths. Number one was their having no desire for the love, hubbud dunya, having no hubbud dunya at all. And number two was hunger. And when we look at it, these are two things actually which our akabirins and shuyukh say when it comes to tazkiyah and purification of the soul. Number one is staying away from the dunya. Because if you get involved in the dunya, it's like, say for example, you're in a river or you're in the ocean, you won't be able to get out of it. So shunning dunya, staying away from the dunya, one, and number two is hunger. Now obviously it doesn't mean that hunger in terms of hunger like the Ashab Suffah, but I did touch on this before, that eating too much food is actually bad for your ruh. Because what happens is that when you eat too much, you become lethargic. When you become lethargic, then you feel difficult to pray salah, wake up for tahajjud, wake up for fajr, all these things happen. So these are two very important things which you should adhere to. And when you look at it, all can be traced back to the Ashab Suffah, the Sahabas, like Abu Hurairah anhu, staying away from the dunya, and also number two, hunger, not eating too much, because obviously eating too much makes a person lazy, and when that happens, then it makes that person lax when it comes to the acting upon the Quran, the Sunnah, namaz, the ibadat, the ma'mulat, the tasbih, the azkar, and so on and so forth. So may Allah subhanahu give us the tawfiq to obviously implement these traits and attributes of the Ashab Suffah in our lives. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillah.